I can see a lot of conversations happening now where Albertans are questioning, what do we get from the rest of Canada? To my point earlier about like, if Canada's the fourth largest economy in the United States, if all of Canada was absorbed, right? How much of that came from Alberta? You know what I mean? So I think that the federal government does not seriously improve Alberta's access to markets, you could have a constitutional crisis.
Quebec sits on an enormous reserve of critical minerals and untapped energy potential. Yet, it continues to block major projects like GNL Quebec and Energy East under the guise of a lack of social acceptability.
We talk about Energy East or GNL. I think that we need to have social acceptability. And if Daniel Smith or whoever table projects, will look at them, but we need to have social acceptability.
Let's not forget that in 2018, François Legault campaigned on reducing Quebec's dependence on equalization payments. He promised to stimulate economic growth, in part by developing oil and gas.
Le gouvernement devrait se dépêcher à prendre une participation, ensuite s'associer avec des grandes pétrolières qui ont l'expertise, puis aller de l'avant. On peut pas se permettre le luxe de ne pas exploiter le pétrole avec la dette de 250 milliards qu'on a, avec les taux d'impôt les plus élevés en Amérique du Nord. Donc, il y a une urgence d'agir. Puis actuellement, pour avoir été là pendant un certain nombre d'années, je sais que quelques dogmatiques empêchent ce développement.
Par ailleurs, votre parti est pour le pipeline Énergie Est.
On est ouvert au projet, mais à deux conditions. D'abord, il faut minimiser les risques environnementaux, entre autres les risques de déversement de pétrole. Et deux, il faut surtout que le gouvernement du Québec demande des redevances importantes pour la partie du pétrole qui sera exportée.
La péréquation, ça existe depuis le début du Canada. C'est dans la Constitution. Le Québec a droit à la péréquation. Mon objectif, c'est éventuellement de créer assez de richesses au Québec pour qu'on n'en ait plus besoin, mais ça peut prendre une vingtaine d'années avant d'y arriver.
Fast forward to today, and Legault has completely betrayed that promise, going so far as to ban oil and gas exploration altogether. Now, despite clear threats from the U.S. regarding energy security, Legault continues to hide behind the excuse of social acceptability when in reality, 74% of Quebecers support building pipelines, according to the latest poll. So the question must be asked, has Legault bent the knee to the very ideological forces he once condemned for blocking economic development? To dig deeper into the issue, I sat down with Robbie Picard, energy advocate and founder of Orsan Strong. For over a decade, Robbie has worked to shift public perception on oil and gas, highlighting the massive benefits this industry brings, not just to Alberta, but to Canada as a whole. The first thing I wanted Robbie to explain was the direct economic benefits of building pipelines and responsibly extracting our own resources.
So one of the things that we've been working on for quite a while, and through both like the magazine, Oil and Gas World magazine, and Oil Sands Strong, and all the other stuff we work on, is that we have been fighting so hard for more of a united approach. So when you live in Alberta, we're a very generous province, but you look at the amount of money that leaves here, particularly goes to Quebec. Quebec always gets the most transfer payments every year, regardless if they have a balanced budget. And I love Quebec, but in order to get Canadian oil, it has to go through the United States and then back up into Canada. And we talk about interprovincial trade regulations, but the truth is that we don't really work as a united country. And is taking sort of a threat of tariffs and annexation and all this stuff. You wonder if we would have done these pipelines, say 15, 20 years ago when we started talking about them, definitely 10 years ago, our country's GDP as a total would be a lot higher than it is now. I mean, if we became the 51st state, we're not even number one. We're still behind Texas. Like, I think we'd be the fourth largest state. And that is embarrassing as a country that has like the richest resources in the world. Right now, the Japanese, prime minister is going to talk to Trump about getting LNG, liquid natural liquefied gas. And we said no to Germany. We said no to multiple other countries. Like, our prime minister has really damaged our country. And this is really bad. And I hope that we can somehow see this as a wake-up call that our entire economy is dependent on one customer. It's kind of scary. And I mean, I guess the silver lining is that there is a bit of a nationalism. I know Quebec is talking a little bit more about the Energy East pipeline now. In a lot of ways, I feel that Quebec and Alberta are very similar provinces. We're both very unique. We're more of sort of a Texas approach here. Quebec is, a little bit more in kind of like artistic, but also very, very worker, that French bite. And I really always thought that we should sit down and really see how we can work together, because we're in a situation now where, it's not good, and it didn't need to be this way.
So I asked Robbie to explain the risk-benefit trade-off of using pipelines.
Well, I think if you look at that big train wreck that happened in Quebec a few years ago, pipelines prevent that. I'm also going to say, like, every time there's a new pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, there was a big, big protest, boom, boom, boom. And everyone said the pipeline would be horrible. It's not. The pipeline's been operating safely for years. The Trans Mountain Pipeline, which has just been kind of twinned and completed, that pipeline was operating for 50 years. Now, you could have a spill periodically, sure, but then they clean it up, and it's usually pretty minor. You save on the environment because the piping it is less carbon emissions. And frankly, Canada is a country, we only produce 0.15% of all global emissions anyway. And if they're not getting the oil from Canada, they're getting it from countries that don't have environmental standards, that don't care about Indigenous reconciliation, don't care about human rights. So unfortunately, there's just a whole ton of bad things that happen when you don't get the oil from your own country. And I think unfortunately, these so-called environmentalists have taken a false narrative about Canadian oil, Alberta oil, and gas, and have not articulated what they should have in the first place. And it's real simple. I mean, right now, Trump hasn't really done anything. There's just sort of like a lot of tweets or truth or whatever. But the matter of fact is that Canadians are panicking. They're panicking because if he does put in that 25% steel tariff, that affects Quebec. It affects Quebec huge with the stuff he's doing. Now, what would make it a little bit easier for Quebec is if Quebec got their liquid natural, their LNG to market, that would help stabilize Quebec. I mean, there's a lot of things that Quebec needs to think about. They're not as independent as they used to be. They just had to redo the deal with Newfoundland and Labrador for their power. We are either a country that works together or we're not. And all of the negativity towards the oil and gas industry over the years have hindered investment, they've hindered progress. And the truth is, we've got some of the greatest, safest, reliable energy in the world. Our country, if we come together, we should be the richest country in the world. We have more resources than any other country. We've got a decent democratic system. We are our own worst enemy, and we're holding back the progress of this country.
Canadians know the national anthem. They stand in silence to remember those who died for this country. But not every Canadian knows their rights and freedoms. The Freedom Passport will change that. It looks and feels like a Canadian passport, but contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a portable, easy-to-read format. The Freedom Passport. Order one for yourself and for all the freedom lovers that you love at freedompassport.ca.
I don't really believe that these politicians hold to their values. So they're already talking about getting rid of the carbon tax. And Mark Carney himself is talking about, like changing it. It would only be on steel. And he said, well, no one buys steel individually.
Then secondly, what we're going to do is make sure not that the government pays, not that we as taxpayers pay, but the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used to.
Which he's wrong, because there's steel in everything that we use, and the costs do come back to consumers. If you're buying a toaster or a microwave, that's steel. It's a matter of holding on to power. Trudeau should have called an election and let Canada have a mandate, right? And that's what he should have done. He should have done it on his own merit. Proroguing Parliament, what he did, and all these games to stay in power and hope that the PR doesn't stay as popular and it gives Carney time. And let's just be honest. I mean, the entire argument has been based on carbon tax and all these things. And now all of a sudden they're like, well, no, it's not about what's right for the country. It's about what is the social license. The damage that has been done over this past few years in the Liberals, I mean, we could have had a country that was had pipelines in every direction supplying energy, which pays for social programs like daycare in Quebec, healthcare, universities, schools. I mean, if you look at Norway, they've got the sovereign wealth fund. They've got $1 trillion in that account. Alberta and Norway are the same size, 5 million population, but they can hold on to their wealth. Alberta has to spread their taxes and their revenues across Canada all the time. So we can't really bank it here in Alberta because we're busy sending over money to all the other provinces. If the Canada looked at Alberta like something to protect and cherish, and we developed our resources and we held on to a chunk of it for the future, think of the social programs our country could have. Think of the schools we could have, the universities, like the technology that we could have.
You believe that green activists, like environmentalists, are maybe too powerful?
When you live in a big city like Montreal, you become disconnected how much your carbon footprint is, because it's really easy to think that there's no carbon footprint because, you're recycling, you're eating properly. But to run that in a city requires a lot of stuff that people don't see. And I think that when you're in the rural area and you have a farm, or you understand how things happen, or you work in a mine, then you know that regardless of what type of energy it is, there's a cost. And there is no such thing as green energy. Windmills now are falling apart like crazy and they can't recycle the blades. Every type of energy needs some sort of fossil fuel to get it there. With solar panels, or even hydro, the amount of stuff that it takes to do that.
If Mark Carney take into power, we know that he would keep the same cabinet. So, of course, Stephen Guilbeault will stay into power. And so you will still be the target from green policies and target emissions. Do you think at one point Alberta will be willing to be the 51st state of America and just leave Canada, because at one point this is not going anywhere?
I think what's going to happen right now, more than ever, is that Alberta will find a way to be taken seriously. Now, I can see a lot of conversations happening now where Albertans are questioning, what do we get from the rest of Canada? To my point earlier about if Canada's the fourth largest economy in the United States, if all of Canada was absorbed, right? How much of that came from Alberta? You know what I mean? So I think that the federal government does not seriously improve Alberta's access to markets you could have a constitutional crisis. As a province, we've been very disrespected by the rest of Canada for years. I mean, you see a picture of it. You see the kind of the cow eating the hay, and that's sort of Alberta, and then the milking the cow in Quebec and Ontario. So whatever happens, there needs to be fast, quick response to making Alberta, getting our oil and gas to market in a fair way. So that Liberal Party has really put us in a spot. This is the worst that I can ever remember. I don't think historically we've ever been in a situation like this. And that's their lack of vision, their so-called wokeness without a point, and just attacking us. Like when you have a prime minister says that we're going to phase out the oil sands and we're going to phase out fossil fuels, and then they're going to force us to drive electric cars. And, to be perfectly honest with you, I think it's not so much about Stephen Guilbeault. It has more to do with Jagmeet. Jagmeet is the guy that he's really the second most powerful person in Canada. Depends on what he does. Now, if he honors his word and we go to an election, that'll be a different story. And I think you'll see that we can have it out. So the Liberals at this moment in time have had horrible policies that have been very anti-Canadian. And that's basically it. Alberta's, like, we don't have the same say. Like, for instance, Quebec, if you combine Alberta's population and British Columbia's, we have more people. But Quebec still has more senators than Alberta and BC combined. Our Western Canada is just not respected in Ottawa. We never have been.
As you can see, Canada is now suffering of the woke and anti-oil and gas policies that the Liberals have applied in Canada for almost a decade. We want an election now. We started a petition at calltheelection.ca. I invite you to sign it, but to share it and to make sure we put pressure on the government to start an election now.